"People like you belong on the floor," Derek Mallon said, and the whole Lantern Bay Café went silent as Rowan Hale crashed against table 7. A paper cup burst open, dark coffee spreading across the old wooden boards inches from his daughter's shoes. Piper did not scream. She only stared at the purple crayon rolling out of her hand and stopping beside the polished heel of Camille Voss, the billionaire CEO who had just walked in to decide whether this little cafe would survive or be erased forever. Everyone expected Rowan to fight back. Derek wanted it. The customers feared it. Even Camille's security guard shifted forward, ready for violence. But Rowan only wiped coffee from his sleeve, picked up the crayon and placed it gently back in his daughter's trembling fingers. "Look at me, sweetheart," he whispered. "A man can fall without becoming low." For the first time, Camille stopped seeing a failing business and started seeing a mystery. Why was every person in that room silently protecting this poor single father? And what truth was hidden inside the old cafe wall? The first thing Rowan Hale noticed was not the pain in his shoulder, or the coffee burning through the sleeve of his faded denim jacket, or even the sudden silence that swallowed Lantern Bay Café after Derek Mallon shoved him into table 7. It was Piper's purple crayon rolling across the old wooden floor, spinning once, twice, then stopping beside the polished heel of a woman who looked too expensive for a place like this. Camille Voss stood in the doorway with rain shining on her cream-colored coat, 2 assistants behind her, a security man at her right shoulder, and the future of the entire block tucked inside the thin leather folder beneath her arm. Everyone in the cafe knew why she had come. Voss Hospitality Group had been buying properties along the waterfront for months, turning family shops into glass-fronted restaurants, quiet bakeries into boutiques, and old buildings into clean, profitable spaces where no one remembered who used to sit by the window on rainy mornings. Lantern Bay Café was supposed to be next. To Camille, at least, from the reports she had read, it was a failing little business with outdated equipment, declining revenue safety issues, and an owner too sentimental to admit the neighborhood had changed. To the people inside, it was the last warm light on a street being slowly polished until it no longer recognized itself. Rowan had spent enough mornings under the cafe counter to know every sound the place made. The loose floorboard near the register clicked twice when June Carver hurried across it. The old refrigerator hummed louder when the rain came in from the bay. The espresso machine hissed like an old man clearing his throat whenever the pressure built too high. He knew these things because he was the one everyone called when something broke and there was no money to replace it. He was not officially on the payroll most weeks. June tried to pay him properly, but Rowan had a way of folding invoices in half, tucking them under a mug and saying a cup of coffee and 1 blueberry muffin for Piper would settle the matter until next time. June hated that he did it. She also depended on it. She was 63, widowed, proud in the way people become when life has taken nearly everything except their ability to open the door each morning. For 29 years, Lantern Bay had served fishermen before dawn, teachers before school, nurses after night shifts, widowers who ordered black coffee just so someone would ask how they were doing, and parents counting coins while pretending they were not. Its windows glowed yellow against the gray harbor weather. Its chairs did not match, and the menu board still had chalk marks from 3 summers ago. It was not efficient. It was alive. That morning, Piper had sat at the corner table with her backpack at her feet drawing, while Rowan tightened a copper fitting beneath the espresso machine. She was 7 small for her age, with serious eyes that noticed more than adults wished children would notice. Her drawing was titled, "My Safe Place." In it, the cafe windows were bright as lanterns. June stood behind the counter with a crooked smile. Hallie Sutton carried a tray almost bigger than her arms, and Rowan stood near the front door, one hand raised as if telling the whole world to be gentle before coming inside. Hallie had leaned over the table and laughed softly. "Your dad looks like he's guarding the place." Piper had not looked up from coloring the door purple. "He is not a guard," she said. "He just makes things safe." Under the counter, Rowan's wrench stopped moving for half a second. He did not turn around because if he did, Piper would see what that sentence had done to him. 4 years had passed since his wife. Clara died on a hospital bed, too white, too quiet, too full of machines that promised time and then failed to give it. Since then, Rowan had learned to live in small tasks. Pack the lunch, pay what bill could be paid, fix what could be fixed, breathe when grief came without warning. He did not consider himself brave, he considered himself busy. A father did not get the luxury of falling apart where his child could trip over the pieces. By noon, the rain had strengthened, tapping the cafe windows in silver lines and carrying customers inside with wet coats and tired faces. June kept glancing at the white envelope behind the register, the one stamped with the clean black logo of Voss Hospitality Group. The offer inside was large enough to tempt anyone who did not understand what surrender looked like when written politely. It promised relief, transition support, a generous acquisition package, and redevelopment opportunities. It did not promise that Hallie would keep her job, or that the old men at the window would still have somewhere to sit, or that Piper would ever again draw the cafe as a safe place. Rowan had seen June read it 3 times that week, each time slower, as if the words might rearrange themselves into mercy. Then Derek Mallon arrived 15 minutes before Camille. He did not enter like a customer, he entered like an inspection. His suit was dry despite the rain, his hair perfect, his watch bright enough to catch the cafe lights when he lifted his hand to check the time. Derek was Voss Hospitality's regional development manager, which meant he was paid to turn old places into numbers and numbers into promotions. He looked at the cracked tile by the counter, the aging pastry case, the water stain near the ceiling, and finally at June, who had flour on one sleeve and worry in both eyes. "This is worse than the photos," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Sentimental, outdated, inefficient." June folded her hands against her apron. "This cafe has served this neighborhood for almost 30 years. Derek smiled like the sentence amused him. "That explains why it looks 30 years tired." A few customers looked down into their cups. Hallie stiffened behind the counter, and Rowan, still kneeling by the espresso machine, slowly set his wrench on the towel beside him. He had met men like Derek before, men who mistook manners for weakness, silence for permission, and money for proof that they were better than the people they were hurting. He also knew that anger was a door. Once opened, it rarely cared who walked through behind it, so he stayed quiet. Derek moved through the room, tapping the pastry case with one finger, frowning at the handwritten specials, asking Hallie why the display looked half empty. "Because we sold the morning batch," she said. "Then make it look full," Derek replied. "People do not invest in empty." Hallie's cheeks reddened. June opened her mouth, but Derek turned before she could speak. "And please do not explain. Explanations are what failing operators use when they run out of standards." That was when the front bell chimed and the cafe seemed to inhale. Camille Voss stepped inside as if the rain itself had made room for her. She was younger than June expected, perhaps mid-30s, but carried herself with the cool precision of someone who had learned early that hesitation cost money. Her dark blonde hair was pinned smooth. Her expression revealed almost nothing. Behind her came 2 assistants with tablets, and Graham Vale, a broad-shouldered security director, whose eyes moved across the room once and missed very little. Derek changed instantly. His voice warmed, his posture straightened, and his cruelty put on a polished coat. "Ms. Voss," he said, "welcome to Lantern Bay. I apologize for the condition. As you can see, the property has potential, but the current operation is struggling badly." Camille's gaze moved from the stained ceiling to the uneven counter, from the patched seats to Rowan's worn boots and work jacket. In that first glance, he knew exactly what she saw. Another local complication. Another tired man attached to a place that no longer made financial sense. Piper, however, saw something else. She watched Camille with the directness only children can get away with, then quietly turned a page in her sketchbook. Camille noticed. Perhaps because everyone else was afraid to look at her too long, the child's stare felt impossible to ignore. "What are you drawing?" she asked. Piper hesitated, then angled the paper slightly. It showed Lantern Bay Café glowing beneath a rainy sky, but near the door stood a woman in a pale coat wearing a crown cracked down the middle. One assistant gave an awkward cough. Camille's eyebrow lifted. "Is that supposed to be me?" Piper nodded. Rowan spoke gently from beside the machine. "Piper." But Camille raised one hand, not offended, only curious. "Why is the crown broken?" Piper looked at the picture, then at Camille's perfect coat and lonely eyes. "Because pretty things can still look sad." For the first time since she entered, Camille had no answer ready. The silence that followed was soft and strange, like the room had discovered a secret. Then Derek laughed and stepped between them. "Children say dramatic things when adults fill their heads with problems," he said. "Her father lets her spend too much time around failure." Rowan stood then. Not quickly, not aggressively. Just upright, calm grease on his knuckles, eyes steady. Piper pulled her sketchbook close to her chest. Hallie turned too fast with a tray of cups rattled by the tension, and one saucer slipped from the edge. It hit the counter, rolled, and dropped to the floor without breaking. A small mistake. A human mistake. Derek made it sound like a verdict. "Unbelievable," he snapped. Hallie bent at once. "I'm sorry, I'll get it." "Do not apologize to the floor," Derek said. "Apologize to Ms. Voss. She is here to decide whether this place deserves saving, and you are showing her exactly why it does not." Hallie froze, humiliation flooding her face. June whispered, "Derek, please." He pointed toward her without even looking. "You have done enough." Rowan stepped forward. Only one step, but it put him beside Hallie instead of behind her. "She didn't drop it because she's careless," he said. Derek turned slowly, delighted to have found the target he preferred. "Excuse me," Rowan tapped the warped counter with 2 fingers. "The edge is uneven. I mentioned it yesterday after you leaned on it hard enough to crack the brace." The cafe went still. Camille looked from Rowan to Derek. Graham's attention sharpened. Derek's smile thinned into something meaner. "Careful, Hale." Rowan picked up the saucer, wiped it with a clean towel, and placed it near the sink. Truth does not become disrespect just because it comes from someone you look down on. No one breathed for a moment. Outside rain ran down the windows, blurring the street into gray light. Derek stepped closer, his expensive cologne cutting through the smell of coffee and cinnamon. "You think this is your moment," he said. Rowan's voice stayed low. "No, I think it's hers. Let her work." That was all. No insult, no threat. But it struck Derek harder than shouting because Rowan had refused to be afraid in public. Derek glanced at Camille, then at the customers, then at Hallie, whose tears had not yet fallen but were close. Pride made his choice before judgment could stop him. "People like you always want to play noble," he said, and shoved Rowan backward into table 7. The table lurched. A paper cup tipped. Coffee spilled across the floor. Piper gasped, her purple crayon slipping from her hand and rolling toward Camille's polished heel. For one heartbeat, every person in Lantern Bay Café saw Rowan Hale fall in front of the woman who could erase the place he had tried so hard to protect. For half a second after Rowan Hale struck the edge of table 7, Lantern Bay Café seemed to lose every sound it had ever known. The rain kept tapping the windows. The espresso machine kept breathing through its cracked valve, but no one moved. Rowan felt hot coffee soak through his sleeve, yet he did not look at the burn. His eyes went first to Piper. She stood beside her chair with her small hand frozen where the purple crayon had been. That was the danger Rowan understood better than any bruise, the possibility that his daughter might learn in one terrible instant that cruelty was stronger than dignity. Anger came to him like a blade placed in his hand. It would have been easy to use it. Derek Mallon was close, still leaning forward with the arrogance of a man who expected either fear or violence. And Rowan knew how quickly a room could turn against the person who reacted instead of the person who started it. One shove back, one raised voice, one wrong movement near Piper, and Derek would have exactly what he wanted. Proof that the poor handyman was unstable. Proof that June Carver's Café attracted trouble. Proof that Camille Voss should sign the acquisition papers and erase Lantern Bay before sunset. Rowan opened his hands and bent to pick up the crayon. It had landed beside Camille's immaculate shoe, a tiny, bright thing between two worlds, a child's drawing and a billionaire's decision. Camille did not step away. She watched him wipe the crayon on his sleeve and place it gently back into Piper's palm. "Look at me, Pip," he said softly. "Do not let someone else's ugliness decide what kind of person you become." Piper's eyes filled, but she nodded. Derek laughed sharp and false. "Listen to him. He gets shoved into a table and turns it into a bedtime lesson." A few customers shifted ashamed but silent. Hallie Sutton stood behind the counter with both hands over her mouth. June's face had gone pale in the way that made Rowan think of unpaid bills and the white envelope behind the register. Camille had not spoken. That silence helped Derek more than any defense. He straightened his suit jacket and turned toward her with polished regret. "Ms. Voss, I apologize. This is exactly the instability my reports warned about. Emotional attachments, untrained staff, local men interfering with a professional assessment. I tried to keep the visit orderly." Graham Vale moved one step away from the door, his eyes fixed not on Derek, but on Rowan's hands. Orderly June whispered, "You pushed him." Derek did not even look at her. "I prevented escalation." That was when Rowan understood the trap. Derek only needed Camille to believe him long enough to close the deal, write June off as emotional and turn the room's fear into evidence. If Rowan stayed silent, Derek's lie would harden. If he struck back, the lie would become useful. If he begged, June's survival would look like charity. For years, Rowan had believed restraint meant absorbing pain without passing it on. But standing there with his daughter trembling and June nearly broken, he realized restraint was not surrender. Dignity did not mean allowing a bully to write the ending. It meant choosing the cleanest way to stop him. Rowan rose slowly. Coffee dripped from his cup onto the floor. He looked at Camille first, not Derek. "Ma'am, if you came here to inspect the business, then inspect all of it. Not just the walls," he points at. Derek's smile tightened. "Careful." Rowan turned to him. "I am being careful. That is why I am still calm." The words landed harder than a threat. Camille finally spoke, her voice cool. "Mr. Hale, what exactly are you suggesting?" Rowan glanced toward the espresso machine. "That some failures in this cafe were helped along." June blinked. "Rowan..." He lifted a hand gently. The machine was shorting before sunrise. I opened the side panel and found a cut line. Clean, not worn. I didn't say anything because an accusation without proof is just noise, and this room already had enough noise. Hallie's eyes widened. Derek stepped forward, anger flashing through the smooth mask. "This is absurd. He breaks machines for sympathy and now wants to blame corporate." Piper flinched, and Rowan's calm nearly cracked. Rowan moved half a step in front of her, a small shield made of bone and breath. "Leave my daughter out of your performance," he said. Derek took that as invitation. "Then stop using her as a prop." The room changed. It was slight, but Camille felt it. A line had been crossed that money could not polish. Graham moved again, but Rowan raised one palm not to stop consequence, only to prevent panic. His decision had settled inside him. He would not fight Derek's way. He would not beg Camille's mercy. He would gather what was true and put it where everyone could see. "June," Rowan said, keeping his voice even. "The little camera above the bakery shelf. The one your nephew installed after the cash drawer went missing last winter. Does it still record to the old card?" June stared at him. "I thought it stopped working when the Wi-Fi went out." The Wi-Fi stopped. The recording didn't. Derek's face changed so fast only someone watching for guilt would have seen it. Camille saw it. Graham saw it. "I checked it this morning," Rowan continued, "just enough to know someone was here before opening." Derek forced a laugh. "You expect the CEO of Voss Hospitality to take evidence from a handyman with a grudge?" Camille looked at him, and for the first time her gaze did not protect him. I expect to see evidence before deciding whether it matters. The sentence struck Derek like a door closing. Rowan felt Piper's fingers brush the back of his hand. She was still frightened, but no longer only afraid. She was watching him differently now, as if she understood that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it remembered where the old camera was. Rowan looked down at her and felt the shift inside himself become solid. He had spent years teaching his daughter how to survive a hard world without becoming hard inside. Now he had to teach her the next lesson. Kindness must be brave enough to defend itself. He turned toward June. "May I go behind the counter?" June nodded, tears gathering but not falling. "You never had to ask." Rowan walked slowly, refusing to give Derek a single gesture he could twist. Hallie moved aside. Camille followed with her eyes. Graham stopped near the counter, keeping enough distance to let the truth arrive without force. Behind Rowan, Derek began talking too quickly about liability, context, tampered equipment, desperate owners, and unreliable locals. The more he spoke, the less powerful he sounded. Rowan opened the drawer beneath the pastry case and reached toward the small black recording unit tucked behind unused menu cards. His hand found the memory card warm from the machine, ordinary looking for something that might decide the fate of an entire room. He paused, because once he pulled it free, nothing would stay the same. June might lose the illusion that this was only bad luck. Camille might have to face what her company had allowed. Derek might become dangerous in a different way. Rowan looked back at Piper. Her crayon was clenched in her fist, now purple showing between her fingers like a small flag. That was enough. Rowan removed the card, held it up where Camille could see, and said, "If this shows what I think it shows, then this cafe was not failing. It was being pushed." The memory card looked too small to carry the weight now pressing on every person inside Lantern Bay Café. Rowan Hale held it between two fingers, careful not to let his hand shake, while Derek Mallon stared at it as if it were not plastic and metal, but a blade pointed straight at the polished center of his life. For the first time since he entered the cafe, Derek stopped performing for the room and began calculating how much danger one quiet man could cause. Camille Voss noticed the change. So did Graham Vale. So did June Carver, who stood behind the register with one hand over the white acquisition envelope as though she were trying to keep it from swallowing her whole. Rowan stepped toward Camille's assistant, a young woman named Elise, who had been typing notes since the moment she walked in, and placed the card in her open palm. "There should be footage from before opening," he said. "The camera angle faces the bakery shelf and part of the counter. If I'm wrong, I'll say I'm wrong in front of everyone." Derek laughed, but the sound was too quick, too sharp. How noble. The handyman puts on a courtroom act. Rowan did not answer him. That was part of his decision now. Derek fed on reaction. Rowan would give him evidence instead. Elise looked at Camille, waiting for permission. Camille's face remained composed, but the cold certainty she had carried into the cafe had begun to fracture. She had spent years trusting reports, summaries, projections, clean slides full of clean numbers. Numbers did not tremble behind counters. Numbers did not draw broken crowns. Numbers did not stand in wet jackets with coffee on their sleeves and still check whether everyone else was all right first. "Play it," Camille said. Elise opened a slim card reader from her bag and connected it to her tablet. The room seemed to lean closer. Even the old espresso machine fell into a softer hiss, as if the building itself had lowered its voice to listen. Piper stood beside Rowan with her sketchbook pressed against her chest, her purple crayon still trapped in her fist. Rowan wanted to kneel and tell her not to be scared, but he knew she was watching something more important than comfort. She was watching whether truth could survive the hands of people powerful enough to bury it. The tablet screen flickered. Elise tapped once, frowned, then tapped again. "There are files," she said. Derek's jaw tightened. "Of course there are files. Anyone can put files on a card." Elise ignored him. "But the first clip is damaged." A small breath passed through the room, almost a collective collapse. June's fingers dug into the edge of the counter. Hallie closed her eyes. Derek seized the moment like a man grabbing a rope over a cliff. "There it is," he said loudly. "Damaged evidence. How convenient. Ms. Voss, this is exactly what desperate people do when they know the business case is lost. They invent sabotage, wave around broken recordings, and hope emotion does what revenue cannot." Rowan felt the blow of it land across the room. Not on him, but on June, on Hallie, on Piper, on every person who had ever been told their pain was just poor strategy. He could feel anger again, hotter than the coffee on his sleeve, but he held it still. "Try the next file," he said. Elise glanced up. "There is a second one, but it may take a moment." Derek moved before anyone expected it. He reached across the small space between them, not quite grabbing the tablet, not quite attacking Elise, but close enough that she flinched and nearly dropped the device. Graham was already moving, but Rowan was closer. Rowan stepped in, caught Derek's wrist with one hand, and guided it down without twisting, without hurting, without giving the room the violence Derek wanted. It happened so cleanly that for a second Derek himself seemed confused. Rowan released him at once and stepped back, both palms open. "Do not touch her," he said quietly. Graham stopped beside Camille. His expression changed from watchful to certain. He leaned slightly toward her and murmured, "That was restraint, not aggression." Camille heard him, but her eyes stayed on Rowan. Derek's face flushed dark with humiliation. "You put your hands on me." "I stopped you from putting yours on her," Rowan said. "There's a difference." The customers near the window exchanged looks. The elderly man who came every afternoon for soup slowly folded his newspaper. Hallie, who had spent months lowering her eyes whenever Derek raised his voice, lifted her chin a little. The room was shifting, and Derek felt it. His power had always depended on people believing they were alone. Now they were beginning to recognize one another. Elise tried the second file. The screen opened, but the image froze on a gray blur. No face, no sound, only the cafe counter in broken pixels. "It's corrupted," she said softly. Derek spread his hands triumphant. "Enough. Ms. Voss, I strongly recommend we end this visit before your company becomes vulnerable to a staged accusation." Camille looked at Rowan. For a moment he saw what she was weighing. Not only the card, not only the deal, but the cost of believing a man like him over a man she had promoted. Rowan knew then that the proof might not arrive when he needed it. He could not force the machine to reveal the truth. He could only decide what kind of man he would be while the truth was still hidden. "If the file is damaged," he said, "then we recover what we can. But this is bigger than a machine." Derek scoffed. "Bigger? You fix pipes and loose hinges. You do not get to lecture executives on business." Piper suddenly stepped forward. Rowan turned at once. "Pip, sweetheart." "No," she whispered, not to defy him, but because her little courage had finally found its legs. She walked toward Camille with the sketchbook held in both hands. Every step made a faint squeak on the damp floor. Derek rolled his eyes. "Wonderful. Now we bring in the child witness." Camille's voice cut through the room, low and sharp. "Let her speak." Piper stopped in front of her. Up close, Camille no longer looked like a queen from Piper's drawing. She looked tired. Beautiful, yes, but tired in a way adults tried to hide behind expensive coats. Piper opened the first page. "This is Mrs. Greer," she said, pointing to a drawing of an older woman beside a blue car in the rain. "Her tire broke after church. Daddy fixed it and wouldn't take money because she said she only had grocery cash." Mrs. Greer, seated by the window, pressed a hand to her mouth. Piper turned the page. "This is Toby. He waits at the bus stop. Daddy told Miss June to give him soup and say it was extra because he didn't want Toby to feel poor." June made a small sound, almost a sob. Piper turned another page. "This is Miss Hallie when her car died and her brother had a fever. Daddy fixed the battery after work. He said family emergencies should not come with invoices." Hallie's tears finally fell. Rowan looked down, humbled and almost ashamed to be seen so clearly. He had not done those things to become evidence. He had done them because someone needed help, and he had hands that knew how to fix things. Derek clapped once, slow and cruel. Very touching. But children draw fairy tales. Piper turned the final page. Her voice trembled now. The drawing showed Rowan at a kitchen table late at night, bills stacked near his elbow, one hand resting beside a photo of Clara. "This is my mom," Piper said. "She's gone. Daddy misses her when he thinks I'm asleep, but he says grief is not an excuse to stop being good." No one moved. Camille's expression changed completely. Not softened exactly, but opened, as if a locked room inside her had heard a key turn. Rowan felt exposed in a way Derek's shove had not made him feel. Violence only embarrassed the body. Love, when spoken aloud, could uncover the soul. Then, from behind the counter, Elise gasped. Everyone turned. The tablet screen had unfrozen. The damaged file had recovered one frame, then another. Grainy gray footage appeared. Lantern Bay before sunrise, empty, dim, waiting. A figure moved behind the counter. The face was not clear yet, but the suit, the posture, the expensive watch catching the low security light, those were enough to make Derek Mallon go still. Rowan looked from the screen to Camille and knew the next few minutes would decide everything. The recovered footage did not begin with a confession, and somehow that made it worse. It began with Lantern Bay Café before sunrise, the room pale and empty, the chairs still turned slightly from the night before, the pastry case dark, the old floor shining faintly where June Carver had mopped it after closing. For several seconds, nothing moved, and Derek Mallon used those seconds to breathe again, to prepare another explanation, another polished dismissal, another sentence designed to make everyone doubt what their own eyes were about to see. Then the figure on the screen stepped into the frame. Grainy as the image was, no one in the cafe needed Elise to sharpen it. The man moved with Derek's posture, checked the door with Derek's nervous little tilt of the head, and lifted his left wrist where Derek's expensive watch flashed once in the camera's low light. June made a sound that was almost a prayer and almost a wound. Hallie Sutton gripped the edge of the counter. Piper pressed herself closer to Rowan, not hiding from the truth now, but bracing for it. Rowan did not look at Derek. He looked at Camille Voss, because this was no longer only about a bully being caught. It was about whether power would finally recognize what it had allowed. On the screen, the man behind the counter opened the side panel of the espresso machine. His face was blurred when he bent, but his hand was clear when he pulled a small tool from his coat pocket and reached inside. The footage stuttered, froze, then lurched forward again. When it resumed, the wire hung loose, cleanly cut. A faint audio track crackled through the tablet speaker. Derek's voice came thin and metallic but unmistakable. "By tonight she'll see exactly what I told her to see. Bad equipment, panicked staff, desperate owner. We push the price low enough, and the rest of the block follows." The cafe seemed to empty of oxygen. Camille's face did not change at first, and for one terrible moment, Rowan wondered if she would retreat into the same corporate coldness that had brought her here. But then he saw it, not shock, not embarrassment, not even anger yet. Recognition. She was watching her own name being used as a weapon. The recording continued. Derek laughed softly into his phone. "Camille wants clean numbers, not sob stories. Give me a week and I'll clean out that whole street." Elise stopped the clip without being asked. The silence afterward was unlike the silences before. This one had weight. It sat on the tables, on the old cups, on the wet footprints near the door. Derek raised both hands, but the gesture had lost its authority. "That is incomplete," he said. "That is one angle, bad audio, no context." Camille turned toward him slowly. The woman who had entered Lantern Bay Café with a folder and a verdict was still there in her posture, but something human had broken through the polished surface. "Then give me the context," she said. Derek blinked. "What?" "Give me the context in which cutting a machine, humiliating an employee, intimidating an owner, and pushing a father in front of his child becomes professional conduct." No one spoke. Even Graham Vale lowered his eyes for a second as if respecting the moment. Camille stopped defending a system and began examining it. Derek's mouth tightened. I was protecting the investment. You know how these neighborhoods work. They resist every improvement, every plan, every opportunity. If we waited for their feelings to settle, nothing would ever get built. Camille stepped closer. Do not call cruelty improvement. Derek's expression flickered with panic, then hardened into resentment. You are letting them manipulate you. That was when Camille finally looked away from him and toward Piper. The little girl was still holding her sketchbook, the page with Rowan and Clara visible against her chest. Camille had spent years becoming difficult to move. After her father died, after board members questioned whether she was too young to lead, after men twice her age smiled while waiting for her to fail, she had trained herself to trust contracts over faces. Faces complicated decisions. Faces asked for mercy. Numbers did not. Yet all day this child had kept placing faces back into a room Camille had reduced to reports. June was not a failing operator. Hallie was not a staffing weakness. Rowan was not local interference. Piper was not emotional noise. They were people. And if her company had forgotten that, then the failure did not belong to Lantern Bay alone. The least Camille said, her voice steady but lower now, send the footage to legal. Preserve the original file. Do not let it leave our chain of custody. Elise nodded quickly. Graham, contact the police and report property damage coercion and workplace harassment during a corporate assessment. Derek's face drained. Camille, think carefully. She did not flinch at the warning hidden inside her name. I am. Graham moved beside Derek, not touching him yet, but standing close enough that consequence had a body. Derek looked around the cafe, searching for one face willing to remain afraid. He found June crying silently but standing. He found Hallie wiping her cheeks but no longer shrinking. He found Mrs. Greer staring at him with the calm disappointment of someone old enough to recognize a small man dressed in a large suit. He found Rowan not smiling, not celebrating, one hand resting on Piper's shoulder. That unsettled Derek most. He wanted hatred because hatred could be argued with exaggerated used in a report. Rowan offered him only the quiet fact of having failed to make him cruel. This is not over, Derek said. Rowan answered for the first time softly. For once, I think it is. Graham guided Derek toward the door to wait outside away from Piper and the staff until the officers arrived. The bell above the entrance gave a weak chime as they passed through it, and the rain swallowed Derek's final muttered words. No one clapped. No one cheered. The absence of applause made the room feel almost sacred. A bully had been exposed, but the wound he left behind still stood open. June sank onto the stool behind the register, both hands covering her face. Hallie went to her immediately. Piper looked up at Rowan, waiting to learn how victory was supposed to feel. Rowan wished he had an easy answer. He had imagined in some tired corner of his heart that proof would feel like relief. Instead, it felt like standing after a storm and seeing which windows were broken. Camille crossed the room toward June. Every step seemed to cost her something, not pride exactly, but the armor pride had built around shame. Mrs. Carver, she said. June lowered her hands. I am not asking you to forgive me today, Camille continued. I don't think I have earned that. I came here ready to measure your life by a report, and I let a man I trusted turn my company into a threat. That responsibility is mine. June's lips trembled. This place is all I have left of my husband. Camille nodded, and for the first time her composure was not cold. It was careful. Then I should have asked what it meant before deciding what it was worth. Rowan felt Piper's fingers tighten around his. The sentence did not repair anything, but it opened a door where there had been a wall. Camille turned to Hallie. You will receive a written apology from Voss Hospitality, and if you want to file a statement, Graham will make sure no one pressures you. Hallie swallowed. I just wanted to do my job. I know, Camille said. You should have been allowed to. Then she faced Rowan. This was the hardest part, though she did not know why until she met his eyes. He had every right to despise her. He had been shoved in front of his child because her project, her manager, her silence, and her reports had made Derek feel untouchable. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I am sorry." Rowan did not answer quickly. Piper watched him, and because she watched, he chose each word with care. "An apology matters," he said, "but what you do next will matter more." Camille accepted that without defense. "Then help me understand what next should be." Derek's police lights had not yet arrived outside, but the storm inside the cafe had begun to quiet. Rowan looked around at the patched chairs, the old menu board, June's shaking hands, Hallie's wet eyes, Piper's purple crayon resting on the counter like a tiny witness. He had never wanted to lead anyone. He wanted to fix machines, raise his daughter, and get through each day without letting grief turn him bitter. But sometimes life did not ask whether a man wanted responsibility. It simply placed the broken thing in front of him and waited to see if his hands would move. "Start by not buying this cafe to erase it," he said. "If you really want to make it right, help June keep what is hers. Fix what your man broke. Make sure no other small owner on this block gets cornered the way she was. And do it in writing before anyone here has to trust another promise." Camille looked at him for a long moment. Then quietly she said, "All right." It was not a grand redemption. It was not enough. Not yet. But in Lantern Bay Café, beneath the sound of rain and the smell of spilled coffee, it was the first honest step toward peace. By the time the police lights painted the rain outside Lantern Bay Café in slow red and blue flashes, no one inside was looking at Derek Mallon anymore. That was the strange thing about truth once it finally arrived. It did not need to keep shouting. Graham Vale stepped outside with the officers. Elise preserved the recovered footage, and Camille Voss stood in the center of the cafe she had nearly helped destroy, facing the people her company had reduced to weak numbers on a development sheet. June Carver remained seated behind the register, one trembling hand resting on the old brass drawer her husband had installed 22 years earlier. Hallie Sutton stood beside her, still wiping tears from her cheeks, but her shoulders were no longer curled inward. Piper leaned against Rowan Hale's side, her sketchbook hugged to her chest, while Rowan stood with coffee drying on his sleeve, quieter than the moment deserved. Camille looked at him and understood why that quiet frightened men like Derek. It did not ask for permission. It did not perform pain. It simply refused to become less than itself. "I want everyone here to hear this," Camille said, and her voice carried across the room without needing to rise. "Voss Hospitality Group will not proceed with the acquisition of Lantern Bay Café under the terms Derek Mallon prepared. Effective immediately. Every report connected to this block will be reviewed by outside counsel. Every property owner contacted by Derek will receive a direct notice from my office explaining what happened here today. And Mrs. Carver will not be pressured to sell." June stared at her as if the words were coming from very far away. "You mean the offer is withdrawn?" Camille shook her head. "The threat is withdrawn. The offer will be rewritten if you want one, but not as a purchase. As restoration support. My company will pay for the damage caused by our employee, replace the unsafe wiring, repair the counterbrace, upgrade the kitchen equipment, and cover the business you lost because of the sabotage. Ownership stays with you. The name stays. The staff stays. No new sign, no rebranding, no polished story about saving a neighborhood we almost harmed." For a moment, June's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then she covered her face and Hallie wrapped both arms around her. Mrs. Greer began to cry at the window. The elderly man with the folded newspaper removed his glasses and wiped them slowly, though they were not wet. Piper looked up at Rowan. "Daddy," she whispered, "does that mean the cafe gets to live?" Rowan's throat tightened. He had faced Derek's shove, Camille's uncertainty, and the possibility of losing the place that had helped him raise his daughter through grief, but that one question nearly broke him. He crouched to Piper's height, ignoring the sting in his shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart," he said softly. "I think it gets to live." Piper's lower lip trembled, and she threw her arms around his neck. Rowan held her tightly, not caring who watched. It was not victory he felt then. It was release. All the mornings he had fixed the espresso machine for the cost of a muffin, All the times he had told himself kindness was still worth choosing. All the nights he wondered whether Piper saw only a tired father counting bills at the kitchen table, somehow in this old cafe under rainy windows. Those invisible things had become strong enough to hold back. Invisible things had become strong enough to hold back a bulldozer. Camille turned away to give them privacy, but Piper lifted her head. "Ms. Voss." Camille looked back. Piper stepped toward her, still carrying the sketchbook. "Are you going to be sad forever?" The question startled everyone, even Rowan. Camille blinked, and for the first time all day she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman who had been caught without armor. "I don't know," she answered honestly. Piper opened her sketchbook to the first drawing, the one with the cracked crown. "You can draw it different next time," she said. "That's what Daddy tells me when I mess up a picture." Camille looked at the broken crown, then at Rowan. He did not rescue her from the moment. He did not soften it with politeness. He simply let Piper's kindness stand on its own. Camille's eyes shone, though no tear fell. "Your father teaches you well." Piper nodded with complete seriousness. "He says people are not only the worst thing they did unless they keep doing it." The words landed in Camille like a verdict and a gift at once. She turned to June. "Then I would like the chance to stop doing it." The weeks that followed did not turn pain into magic. Derek was investigated, then terminated, and the evidence of his coercion opened other complaints from small owners who had been too frightened to speak. Voss Hospitality paid for repairs, but Rowan insisted every invoice be transparent and every decision approved by June. Camille returned 3 days after the incident in jeans, boots, and a plain navy coat without assistance to sit with June at table 7 and listen to the history of the cafe from the beginning. She learned how June's husband had built the first counter by hand, how Hallie had started working there after her mother's surgery, how Mrs. Greer ordered tea every Wednesday because her late husband used to bring her there after church, and how Rowan had once repaired the front door during a storm while Piper slept under 2 aprons in the back office. Camille did not speak much that day. She wrote nothing down. She only listened, and for her, listening became the first honest work of change. 1 month later, Lantern Bay Café reopened before sunrise. The cracked tile had been replaced, the wiring was safe, the espresso machine purred instead of coughed, and the kitchen shelves gleamed with new steel. But the sign outside remained the same faded blue, swinging gently in the harbor wind. June still stood behind the counter. Hallie managed the morning shift with a steadier voice, and Rowan came in early to check the equipment, even though the new service contract no longer required it. Camille arrived at 7:30 carrying no folder, no acquisition papers, no cold plan for someone else's future. She ordered black coffee in a chipped white mug because June refused to serve her in anything fancy. Graham came 10 minutes later and pretended it was a coincidence, though he had become fond of the muffins. Piper had a surprise waiting near the register, a new drawing in a simple wooden frame. In it, Rowan was not on the floor. Derek was nowhere in the center. June stood behind the counter. Hallie carried a tray. Graham waited near the door, and Camille stood beside the window without a crown at all. Instead, she held a lantern, its yellow light reaching everyone in the room. Outside the drawn cafe, Rowan stood in the rain with one hand open, not pushing the world away, only keeping the light safe for those inside. Beneath the picture, Piper had written in purple crayon, "A man can fall without becoming low, and a heart can change before it is too late." Rowan read the sentence once, then again, and had to look away. Camille stood beside him, her voice quiet. "I don't deserve to be in that drawing." Rowan looked at Piper, laughing with June behind the counter, then at the neighbors filling the chairs. "Maybe not because of what happened," he said, "but maybe because of what you chose after." Camille nodded, accepting both the mercy and the responsibility inside his answer. Piper ran back to Rowan and slipped her small hand into his. "Mom would like this place now," she said. Rowan looked toward the rain-bright window where the morning light had begun to break through the clouds. "She always did," he whispered. And as Lantern Bay Café filled with the smell of coffee, warm bread, and people greeting one another by name, Rowan understood that family was not only the people we lose, or the people we protect. Sometimes family was also the room that helped us remain kind after grief, the child who remembered our best lesson, and the unexpected stranger brave enough to change. In the end, the cafe had not been saved by money power or revenge. It had been saved by a father who refused to trade dignity for anger, a daughter who believed truth could still be drawn in purple, and a woman who learned that love begins the moment power chooses to protect instead of possess.